Hi, I am Dr. Kim Sage. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I really want to start to share more and more about attachment because it really is the core of when I talk so much about toxic parents and wounded parenting and childhood. It is really what happens to us, this attachment pattern that we engage in becomes the heart of how we often engage in the world. It's often called our internal map, right? And I talk a lot about how certain historically mothering but primary caregiver styles really contribute to our struggles and how we show up in the world. And so I'm going to start going through little by little, I believe, this list I made in this video, which is like, I think the main video you see when you come to my page, about how to heal anxious attachment. And I really believe in everything I listed, and I know that it is not easy to do. And so I'm going to provide another, hopefully, layer of steps that will help you. And so let's just quickly revisit what anxious attachment is. And this is really about inconsistent caregiving. So selective misattunement, meaning that the parents would try to attune, but often miss those moments. Often we're distracted, multitasking, and at the heart, overexposed a child to their own internal mood and mind. A lot of sort of anxiety in these parents in general, a lot of fear, and oftentimes there was a bonding over the fear, like, oh, these parents were really good about being extra safe perhaps, and they felt really confident in that. It's just that when it came at times to mirroring or being present, and it could be for things like working or being too distracted with other children. It could be their own mental health issues. There's so many reasons. And as always, these videos really are not intended to blame and shame the incredibly difficult role of being a parent. It is honestly the hardest job I've ever done. And I'm doing it now with young adults, and no one tells you how hard that is and how you think that, okay, they're going to go to college or hit 18 and be gone. And the parenting is just different. And in some ways it's incredibly difficult because you don't really have any power like you do when your kids are little. But it doesn't really matter. Every single stage has been beautiful and devastating and hard and fun and mind-blowingly humbling to me at every stage. And that is no different right now. But what I want you to understand, if you have this style, is that how much on the receiving end as a child, you trying to read and respond and how that mood and mind of the parent, or you needing to be seen or mirrored physically or otherwise, and you trying to get that all the time, plays out in your adult life. And it plays out in a lot of hypervigilance, a lot of fear, a lot of worry about abandonment. It can be from literally believing that a partner, every time they get on an airplane, is going to crash and they're going to leave you. It might be about cheating. It might be about text messages when they haven't responded with a certain amount of emojis or like exclamation points, and they always do. How we overread and overinterpret. And that is really the lens we're wearing. It's like always trying to decipher, what does this mean for me? And the problem with that pattern is, again and again and again, if that is what's happening for whatever reason, it often creates what we call an outside-in orientation. And so what we're doing is we're always looking to read and scan you to then determine what we're going to do, if we're safe, how to respond. And a good example of this is, like I've talked about, over-reading of parents, especially if they had mood swings or they weren't there or there. Everything means something. And this is really true for every dynamic in childhood. But when you have less security, less stability, less consistency, and it might be from financial reasons, a divorce, you might have parents who were doing their best, but the circumstances dictated that at the core, there was some issue there. You learn to be a detective at all times, on alert, reading and detecting everything as threat. It might just be irritability in a parent. It might be rage. It might be your parents fighting, but you notice that when your dad pulls in the driveway and the dishes weren't done and he comes in the door, just using dad for example, but it could be mom or any parent, that a deep sigh, where's your mom? Like just that could trigger a 3-hour argument, right? And so you learn to overread and you apply that same thing, that outside in orientation to your partner. And there's a part of this, and I've talked about this in my video, and we'll get to it later, that is a really good thing. It can make you a very good caregiver, attentive and loving and available for emotional conversations. You're not the person that completely avoids discussing the relationship, right? That's often in a more avoidant dynamic or a more disorganized where it has more of a combination. So you can celebrate some things about this for you. It might mean that you're a really great therapist or a great friend or listener, or you're in a helping profession. And as long as you're trying to manage your boundaries and all of that, which is a whole other conversation, just what I'm saying is don't forget there are some beautiful parts to this. But where it becomes a problem is that at the expense of yourself, you are over focusing on everyone else. And so the number one thing I list in that video about how to heal anxious attachment is to look at how you show up in the world. At the core, you have learned to be more focused on others than your own. And so you often don't know, don't recognize, can't even imagine, can't honor, can't provide for your own needs, because honestly, what the core of this is, you don't even necessarily know how. You don't know what to do. You don't know what your body feels like when it's in need, or you've learned to shut that down. You don't know what it feels like to need anything but have that kind of panicky sense. You're very familiar with that. And when I'm panicking about you and what's happening with you, I'm not able, it feels like it's about me, but really I'm not able to stop and pause and reflect and say, okay, what is happening right now for me, right? What is the trigger? Where am I over responding? What about what I feel? Is this okay or not? Because if I'm so focused on trying to interpret the text message from you, what does that mean? I'm not even asking myself, wait a minute, like, is this an okay behavior? I might get mad at you for it, right? But the mad is often triggered by the fear that it means something, and it means something bad for you. And as I've recently talked about, I really do believe that the core of hypervigilance in more anxious and disorganized attachments, especially if you had parents who were, high mood swings, available, not available, very inconsistent, eggshell, unpredictable, emotionally dangerous in some way or unsafe, is two main things are going on. Number one, your first thought when anyone has emotion, right? Your kids, your boss, anyone close to you, is your body registers it very quickly because you're so used to scanning and being on that hyper alert. Tone of voice shifts, size, chewing. I mean, it can be anything because you're kind of like raw in your nervous system, but you're very aware of emotions. And the second thing is you tend to believe that their emotions have something to do with you. And then that gets kind of deeply buried in your subconscious, and it's my fault. I need to fix it. I'm in trouble. I did something bad. I'm not good. I'm unlovable, right? And so that heightened scanning alongside the interpretation, which oftentimes in childhood, that's exactly what was happening, is what makes it so difficult for us to calm and soothe, not just our bodies, but our minds. We have been deeply wired to engage this way. So what we're going to do is talk about what you can do. Number one is really about learning to take all of this and recognize and identify your own needs. That is the whole point, right? So what I'd like you to maybe consider is, like, every time your go-to, and this is going to be hard at the beginning, and I'm going to do this too, which is, oh, are they hungry? Do they need food? Do I need to take them somewhere? This is like your kids, your partner, your job, is to just start to notice, okay, I just focused on what they want, but what do I want right now? What do I need? Or what do I feel in my body? And this is going to happen a million times a day, especially if you're a compulsive caretaker. And so it's not going to happen so easily, but to start to make connections between how quickly you go to someone else and then to ask yourself, okay, but what about me in this moment? And just name it. Oh, I didn't eat breakfast. My stomach feels a little hungry. Or, oh, I need to make a list because I keep neglecting this bill or whatever it is. But I was hyper-focused on helping them get their driver's license or their bills paid or whatever it is. So trying to check in with yourself. Number two, repeat after me that self-care is not built on a point system where you only get to take care of yourself or do something for yourself. after you've racked up enough points for someone else. I'm going to say it again. Self-care, meaning not just like it could be going to the bathroom, like neglecting your own body. I'm not talking about a massage, although that's a great place to go. I'm talking about everything around caring for yourself. And especially if you were parentified, enmeshed in a certain childhood, so much of what you struggle with is about your need in childhood to neglect your own needs and to minimize and hyper-focus on others. And so there is no point system. There is no, oh, I've exhausted myself and done 50 things for everyone else. Now I get one thing for me. That has to become a belief system, that you're entitled to it. It is your birthright. Number 3, where do I need to do more for myself? So I would say, what do you keep ignoring? Like I struggle with things like paying bills and making appointments, and that might go into a lot of reasons why I do that, from my way my brain works to trauma. But it creates a lot of anxiety. And so I look at my to-do list, that the things that stay and don't get done, which are usually the not enjoyable things, that can create panic. But then there can be a consequence because I've neglected these things. And so look at your to-do list, look at exercise, look at your appointments, and try to make an assessment about, am I really giving myself the space that I deserve? This is a part of my self-care. It is, because it creates a lot of stress when these things aren't done, and potentially negative consequences. Number 4, recognize that you learn to do this outside in orientation, and not only to keep you safe, it distracted you from your own pain, from not getting your needs met, from feeling emotionally abandoned or alone or afraid. And so you have to understand there's a relationship between why you're so good at this and why you do it. If you stop doing it, it's going to force you to start to feel and look at your own story, your own pain, your own trauma. And you have to believe me when I say that it serves a purpose. And that is just to plant a seed here to say, what might I be repressing, suppressing, internalizing, avoiding? What might be grief or fear or sadness or longing that I need to deal with? Number 5, recognize that guilt and or shame, remembering that guilt is generally like I did something bad, shame is I am bad, that is going to be your immediate go-to, because the guilt and shame often come from the parents. You're so selfish, or you just believe that you're not allowed to have a role, and so you believe it's inherently selfish or bad or shameful for you to have needs or not be okay or whatever. And so these are deeply rooted beliefs that will sabotage your ability to take care of yourself and to begin to turn down the volume on that compulsive caretaking. Number 6, where do you resent or judge others for getting things, taking care of themselves, living a certain life? Like if you're super heated about someone else having a nanny and they're a stay-at-home parent, that might be something to do with you. For many parents, for example, they have help because they have no family or they work part-time or whatever it is. Like, who cares? That is their deal. But if something like that really gets you upset, but meanwhile, you have no help and you're exhausted and your partner doesn't really help. Maybe they go to work or you both work, but then they just stop when they get home from work and you're doing the majority of the care. And you're really mad about that and resentful. And then you see someone else getting help and it makes you angry. That might be a trail to follow about what is being neglected and where your hurts are in your own life. Not that you're not allowed to get annoyed with people, but so much of the time when we have that strong emotion, it really has nothing to do with them and everything to do with us and our own hurts. And then the last 2 are, what did you most long for in childhood? Was it support? Was it availability? Was it being nourished with food and healthy foods, or having a partner to do things with, or friendships? Oftentimes you'll realize that you gave up a lot of things, or you learn to neglect those needs because so much of your resource and energy went to taking care of those parents. And so sometimes when you look at what you longed for, it also plays out in the life you dream of, or the partner you want to have, or the job, or the plans. But that can have information buried in it too about what you might also be longing for now and what you can think about starting to implement in your life. And the last thing is to start to do these things, to start giving them to yourself. No one is going to do it. Yes, you were worthy and deserving of a parent doing it, and yet you didn't get it. And at this point, there's only so much that partners and animals and parents and friends and our children should be allowed, or required, I should say, to give, and how much we have to also do for ourselves. And so if you identify all these things, but you don't do anything about it, then you are staying in that neglected, fear of abandonment, hurtful, wounded childhood. And so I made a post a few weeks ago about how I realized there were some elements of my life that, even though I've done so much healing and I talk about so much, and these amazing courses I've created where I really have done so much work on my parents and understanding them and the relationships, like so much of that is like no longer on my plate. Not that it doesn't once in a blue moon pop up, but for the most part, like it doesn't define my life. But as a result of my life now opening up in new ways, where before I couldn't even focus on me very much when I'm raising 4 kids by myself and trying to build a career and, you know, having pretty much full custody, there's not a lot of place for like, where do you get to live and breathe? It's really about survival, and it really has been. But as I'm approaching the end in some parts of the daily parenting journey, it's made me realize that there are some still trauma responses that are just deeply rooted in my childhood about my compulsive caretaking, about my sort of learning to disregard my needs. And that is kind of the journey I'm going on in 2023. I'll probably make a separate video series about it here. I'm definitely doing it on TikTok. And I'm really breaking it up, and you're welcome to give me more ideas, but really into some categories I'm calling eat, breathe, play, move, and love. Because I want to take each category and start to say, okay, I'm going to pick one today. But when we have a certain childhood, for example, we learn to disregard our actual body needs, or we didn't have healthy foods, and so we keep doing that to ourselves, but we feel better when we eat better. So I want to focus on nourishing my body. Not perfectly, because I will always love my sweets, but like, what does that feel like? I want to focus on breathing. When you live in a certain childhood, you really don't know how to do anything but be in survival mode and panic and anxiety driven. And so I love meditation. It is my favorite thing to do, guided meditations. I've been listening to some sort of sound therapy and sound baths. And it really can be so profoundly helpful and healing, but it is often the first thing we stop doing. I'm tired, I didn't sleep well, I'm stressed, and so that's one area. Play, as I've talked about, is a huge area for so many of us where we didn't actually get to be in the experience of joy in play. And in our adult life, like I've said, I can play really well alone. I played so much alone in my childhood, being an only child, and I can really enjoy that. But at times that has let me play so easily alone, or because of trauma or whatever, or exhaustion or time, introversion, all of that, that I need to work on that part of my life. And what would it look like to involve other experiences, other people, things like that. And then moving, as we've talked about in every single video, you know this, that cardio, like exercise, is the number one thing for mental health. And kind of going back to meditation, it is the first thing we say, it's raining, I'm tired, I'll do it later, and then we don't do it later. And so moving, I think, is incredibly powerful. And the last thing I'm going to work on this year to kind of help me live more is love. Is not necessarily intimate love, but to open myself up more to friendship and connection and things like that. When you have lived in a certain life, especially when you're raising kids, no matter where you are, there's only so much you can do for yourself. But if I hadn't had this preloaded trauma personality, I think I would have been, it might have gone a little bit differently. I might have had more space for that. And so what I'm really trying to do this year is to, like, outside of all of this and all of I can share with you about what I know helps heal, there'll always be things that need working on. And those are like the dark crevices I'm going to push myself to lean into. And I'd love for you to join me if you want to. As I said in my post, my most toxic trait is that I never, ever give up. And sometimes to an extreme degree believe that everything is solvable. It's not, but a lot of things are. And it's also the trait that is part of my childhood, my trauma, the trauma personality. So it's helped me not go under, but it can be false and an illusion that you can fix everything. But at the same time, I feel very driven to work on this year. And I feel driven to share it with you. And so I hope you'll join me. So thanks for being here. Please stay safe and have a beautiful day. And I'll see you soon.